Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Bob Schut and Luke Johnson's discourses on Soren Kierkegaard's Works of Love, episode 21?
21, yes, sir.
Yeah. Bob and I were just chatting off air. We've been at this for about 5.5 months, and maybe some far-off, distant generation will appreciate all this toil and labor we put into this. Don't you think, Bob?
Yeah. When the robots take over and they say, "But look at those human beings, how much they toiled, to create this episodic works of love."
Well, maybe before the robots enslave us, they'll be like, maybe humans are worth saving. Look what they can do if they're really dedicated.
Let's hope that's what they think.
Okay. All right. We love you, future robot overlords. You're the best. So, without further ado, I'll let Bob introduce the next section. Where are we in the book?
Section 7 in the book. Let's see. In my book here, section 7 starts on page 292 in my version.
And what version are you using again?
I'm using this Harper Perennial Modern Thought. Looks like that. Okay.
All right, get to it, buddy. I have a feeling you've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, actually, we could probably spend a lot of time on this particular issue. It talks about money. But we're talking first here, it opens up with not a quotation, but one of his ways of expressing things here. Mercifulness, a work of love, even if it can give nothing and is capable of doing nothing. And that's where he's going to try to lead us, this idea of what does it mean to be merciful? And are we being merciful in what we're doing? And how mercifulness can sometimes be disguised, hidden. And so that's where he's going to take us here. We can sometimes think about doing good, charitable works, giving gifts in such a way that we're not doing it by mercy, but because we're supposed to do this as Christians. We do it so that we can get some kind of heavenly reward for it. So he starts out here kind of with this idea that you can't always look at the act or the deed and say, well, look at how merciful that person is. Sometimes the deed, like I say, masks the actual mercy being done, or makes it appear like it could be mercy, but it might not be. He wants us to think about mercifulness when giving. How do people in poverty, though? I mean, when you're giving, usually you're thinking the rich give to the poor. Now he's kind of looking at that, and you can tell he's kind of thinking about that issue. He's saying, okay, well, that makes sense. The rich give to the poor. But what about the poor? So that means the poor can't show mercy. How do people in poverty get to show mercy when they have nothing to give? And this is pretty much what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, but we all have something to give, don't we, Bob?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Because we'll find out it's how we give something, not what we give. And even if we give nothing, we can still do it mercifully, which is what he's going to try to teach us here. Most see the poor as the receiver of mercy and not the giver. We see them as victims because we live in a society where money or wealth determines our status. We even see ourselves in this category when we're deprived of financial gains. And unfortunately, this is really true, and it's so subtle, and it's so built into, as he'll say a little later, this is how we're brought up, to put ourselves and everyone in categories of wealth. And we're all seeking wealth. Not too many people are seeking poverty, although some are. I mean, it's not impossible, but most people are seeking wealth. Wealth is a sign of success. It's a sign of approval. It's a sign of whatever. The poor are excluded from being charitable because we tend to think of charity as quantity and size of the gifts rather than the mercy given behind it. And let me quote here from page 292. You can hear. Oh, actually, I don't. Let's see, where I didn't mark it off here. Woe unto him who devours the inheritance of widows and orphans, but woe also to the preachers who are silent about mercifulness in order to talk about charity. Preaching should be solely and only about mercifulness. So he's making a distinction that we might not have made. The idea is charity, giving, doesn't necessarily make it a gift of mercy. And that's what he's trying to teach us here. Death isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person. Preaching should be about mercifulness. He's attacking those who preach more about being charitable to the church and fail to make the connection of mercy. So again, even in the church, he says, that the focus is upon the gift, the amount, not upon the manner in which it's given. One ought
You know, I live out here, Bob. I live in a very well-to-do area, and there are lots of charity to-dos and balls and galas, and people think of themselves as great philanthropists.
Yeah.
Because they write checks to this and that. I mean, their monocles would be cracking right now if they heard what you were saying. That the amount doesn't matter. Whatever could you mean? I donate thousands, millions every year in the name of orphaned animals in Korea. I am a good man and woman.
Yeah. Well, I hope they're listening today, because they'll learn something today. So he says that one ought to give out of mercy and not just on the giving. Okay. We'll get into the quantity a little later on here. It says the idea often preached is that one is going to get a reward by giving rather than giving for the mere sake of mercy. One now gives in order to get back with interest on their gift. Okay. So faith is brought into the gift when mercy ought to be there. Of course, we are to believe that God will take care of us. He'll provide us with our daily bread. But remember, Jesus says, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. He doesn't say, give us today enough bread for the year. He doesn't say, give us wealth. He doesn't say, give us a big house and servants. He says, give us our daily bread. The Christian idea of wealth is just enough for today. Just sustain my life for today. That's what our idea ought to be. Okay? That's what Jesus' idea was. If we want to live according to what Jesus teaches.
So you're telling me there's something problematic about the number of servants I have?
Perhaps, unless are you paying them well? It depends how well. If you're taking good care of them, that's not a problem. But
I only have 27 servants.
Well, I guess it depends on how big the mansion is, Luke, that you have to take care of. But this is the idea. The Christian attitude is, please just give me enough for daily bread. That's what we should pray for. That's what she would be happy with. You know, if there's a way to be happy with what we have, to be satisfied. If you're not, you'll never be satisfied. You'll always be wanting more and more and more. It's a beautiful thing to arrive at satisfaction. I'm satisfied. I'm happy with what I have, and I don't want any more. You know, it's really a great place to be. The idea often preached is that one is going to get a reward by giving rather than giving for the mere sake of mercy. One now gives in order to get back with interest on their gift. This is a bad place to be because it takes away mercy. We have to be focused on the reason that we're giving the gift. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but this is kind of how he opens it up, how he starts it out, to try to get us to think a little differently about the gift that we give. Faith is brought into the gift when mercy ought to be there. Now, that's a difficult statement here. Of course, we're to believe that God will take care of us. But we ought not let that dominate our giving of our gifts. We can have faith that God will take care of us. But again, faith is give us our daily bread. That's the faith that we have. When we start to have faith that God is going to make us wealthy, we're misunderstanding the teaching of Jesus. Our faith is God will take care of us, as the Sermon on the Mount says, as God takes care of the birds. They neither sow nor reap, and the flowers are beautiful, more beautiful than anything in Solomon's wardrobe. And that's the idea, God will take care of us. But when we don't see it that way, it deprives us of the sense of mercy. Now, and this is very important. It's not so much wrong thinking to say, well, you're wrong and that's what matters, no big deal. The problem with being wrong in this kind of a sense is that it robs you of something that God has for you. In other words, God wants you to experience mercy of giving. If we focus upon giving for the purpose of receiving back, and receiving back 10 times the amount, our focus is taken away from what God can give us for what we want. And that's the big issue that I have an argument with. And we'll see again more as we get into this, how we can relate this to the teachings of Jesus. We don't give to the church, for instance, as an investment where we expect to make a profit. It ought to be a gift of mercy where we expect nothing in return. Nothing, absolutely nothing. That's how we should give to the church. And that's how we should give to others. We give them and we don't expect anything to happen back again. No reward, nothing.
Can I ask an honest question?
Yes.
So I completely agree, but I want to press the limits of expectation and not expecting anything in return. Mm-hmm. If I were to truly sort of crack myself open and examine my motives, like for instance, I think I mentioned last week that I try to share my personal testimonial of Jesus Christ with like one person every day.
Yes,
right?
That's great. That's wonderful.
And, who knows how many people are listening to this, so maybe I just, shared it with a bunch of people. By the way, Jesus Rules, you should totally check him out. But I'd be lying if there wasn't some calculation of self-interest somewhere. Like, for instance, so I guess I'm trying to understand if it's wrong to have these most minor infiltrations of self-interest. So I don't expect anything good to happen for me here in the temporal realm. If God wants to bless me with a beautiful wife and a bunch of money and this and that for her, to be a servant in his kingdom here on earth, awesome. If he wants me to be a pauper, awesome. Like, I'm cool with whatever he wants. But I do take seriously the watchman's call. If the watchman sees the spear and he doesn't warn people, right, then, in some ways, those such individuals have the responsibility of other people's salvation on them. Like if I clam up about not testifying to Jesus in some way, I could have helped people. That was a missed opportunity. And in some ways, I could be responsible for that. So a lot of times not a lot of time, but every once in a while, I wonder, I'll want to evade that wrath that's talked about in Ezekiel. Is that a wrong motive? Similarly, if you take the book of Revelation seriously and you talk about there being a heavenly army that assembles at some point, right? Mm-hmm. Presumably you want your status in that heavenly army to be greater than the most basic entry-level corporal, right? Are these wrong motivations for loving God and testifying to God, given what Kierkegaard is saying? Do you understand the question I'm asking? I know I kind of danced around it, but do you understand the question?
Yeah, I absolutely do. When we talk about wrong, what I'm trying to get back to also is that, without saying right or wrong, what I'm saying is they hide or they keep us from the full blessing. Okay? There's a type of maturity that we can get to that says, my left hand should not know what my right hand is doing. This is the purity of thought from Jesus. That's our goal, to get to that point where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I give the gift and I forget it. I put it out of my mind. Okay? I don't dwell upon it and say, okay, now I'm ready for the reward. How is God going to reward me for this wonderful gift I've given? Because what Jesus says is, when you do that, you've already received your reward. When we talk about it a little later on, there's a parable that he gives us that I think, hopefully, if we have time, we can go over it. The parable of the workers in the field. And it was really not about the amount that they had. It was about their total attitude towards what they were receiving back again from God. And so this is all about attitude. And Jesus...
I guess the idea, the passage from the Bible that I think pinpoints exactly what I'm trying to say is, when we talk about laying up our treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
Because we're no longer seeking the filthy lucre of this world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it would be dishonest to say that we're not looking for some sort of blessing in the next life.
Well, I think we know that what we're doing is the right thing. We know that it's a good thing to do. And we know that we're laying up treasures, but we don't focus upon them. It's not an expectation. No, it can't, if it becomes an expectation, then we are erasing grace and mercy from God. Because then what we're saying is, you owe me, God, because look at all the works I did for you. That's the problem. And that's what Jesus is.
No, I don't think.
No, you don't. But I'm saying that's the danger.
I don't think about it like that. Yeah. But I do look forward. Something I've been thinking about lately, just on a personal aside. I think maybe even on our recordings in the past, I was like, Bob, I want to live to be 5,000 years old so I can read every book that was ever made. You know.
Yeah.
Now I'm just like, oh man, I really want to go to heaven and read those books, because apparently there are books in heaven.
Yeah.
right? Because didn't an angel give John a little book that he swallowed? Right?
A little scroll, right?
Yeah. Well, right. Apparently there are scrolls and presumably books and knowledge that are not here.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh man, who needs these books behind me? I want those books up in heaven.
Yeah, you got a whole new library. Get your library card.
Oh man, I can't wait to go to that library.
Yeah, but those are good ideas. Those are good thoughts to have, that God is going to give us more understanding. Not so much knowledge. Knowledge can be tempting. That can draw us away from God. Remember, it was the serpent who tempted Adam and Eve with knowledge, so we want to be careful. We don't go after pure knowledge, but we want to go after the kind of knowledge that brings us closer to God, which is what we're talking about here, the knowledge of God's library, wisdom.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know, did I answer that enough so far?
You did. I just wanted to make sure that I registered that. I mean, I just felt like it was important in order to be intellectually honest about what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And we're going to answer that as we go through. I don't want to answer it thoroughly yet, but we answer it in kind of like little layers or levels. He says, but the poor and the wretched, they're left out because they can't compete with the quantity given by the wealthy. Now, when you think about it, what does the poor person give? What does the homeless person give? To give them a sense of grace, to give them a sense of this mercy. Who do they show mercy on? Well, we'll find out. They actually show mercy on the rich. But we'll get to that point. We don't talk about how the poor and the wretched can participate in this kind of mercy. We must remember that it's the heart and not the pocket that matters in giving. So Kierkegaard here is establishing that we need to re-examine the giving of gifts or money out of charity. What's important in the eyes of God is what ought to be most important to us. Sometimes the teaching gets lost. I think we know it, but sometimes we get caught up in it. I mean, we all get caught up in things. I think that some people just tend to get caught up in this idea of wealth. I understand it and I sympathize with it. Now he's going to get into this topic more deeply now. He wants to bring the sense of mercifulness to the poor so that they can have a sense of giving the same way that the wealthy have. So he goes on and says, we tend to judge the value of the gift by the effect it has upon the need. And this diminishes the gift to the poor, gift of the poor. They feel ashamed at the size of their gift in comparison to the size of the wealthy. So if you're giving, a gift to the hurricane victims, and you can give $1,000, and you got some other person who they can't possibly afford that, and they give $10. So you're around talking together, and people are saying, "Yeah, I wrote a check for $1,000. Oh yeah, I wrote a check out for $5,000." And then it's your turn, and you say, "Well, I wrote a check out for $10." And you kind of get the snickers. Yeah, that's going to really help a lot. That doesn't even barely pays for a couple of bottles of water. So sometimes this happens like this. We kind of judge the gift, the mercy. We judge the mercy by the size, by the quantity of the gift. If the merciful person has something to give, he will give it very willingly. Mercy is not judged by quantity, and we're going to see this idea later. So that's kind of like the key point. Mercy is not judged by quantity. He discusses some of the stories that Jesus told, which is great. It's good that Kierkegaard does this. Sometimes he gives us puts a little spin on the story that maybe I might not have put on it, but sometimes he nails it. He discusses some of these parables and stories that Jesus tells. The one of the Good Samaritan, and I'm sure you're familiar with that one, Luke, I know you've read through this, but in case somebody's not familiar, real quickly, the story is about a Samaritan who comes along and he finds this man in a pit. Looks like he got beaten up and robbed. So he bends down, he picks the man up, puts him on the horse, brings him into town, pays for the innkeeper to take care of him, to fix him up, to give him a room for the night, and so forth. So he does this, and then he moves on. So this is the Good Samaritan. The idea was also that the Samaritans were looked down upon. What people may not know about the parable, the Samaritans were looked down upon by the Jews. So it's not like this Pharisee comes upon this man, but the Pharisees, he said, walked past the man because it was a holy day. They didn't want to contaminate themselves by touching such a person, because then they would...
What was wrong? I recall what you're saying, because I found that to be very interesting when I was reading through the Old Testament and the way they talked about the Samaritans, that I was like, why are they talking so... They made it sound kind of like a derogatory status in some ways. What was so wrong with the Samaritans?
Well, I believe it was
in their eyes.
The Samaritans were... I'm trying to think here what they were. I believe they were north of Palestine, and they were a mixed race. I believe that they were, I'm trying to think of what they were. I want to say Jewish mixed with, trying to think of the people that live north of Israel. Maybe you can look that up and find out again.
Yeah,
but I believe that they were a mixed race, and they didn't practice Judaism the same way that the Jews practiced it, and they even had a different holy mount that they worshiped that. They felt this is where the law was given. So they had different ideas about how to worship God. So they were kind of rejected for that idea. Kierkegaard now, he says, well, let's change the story a little bit. He says, what if the Samaritan didn't have any money? So he comes upon this man, he stumbles upon the guy, he wants to help the guy, he carries him to the innkeeper, but he doesn't have enough money to give him a room or even buy him any food. Would he still have been a giver of mercy? So Kierkegaard's point is to show that the mercy was shown by his acts. It was his intentions and not the resources that really mattered. So the man wanted to help the Samaritan, and he did everything he could to help the Samaritan. And that's where the mercy lied, not in the amount of the gift, because he couldn't give a gift. He then mentions the widow and the mites, which I like this story very much, and I'm going to go over this a little bit more detail here. From Mark 12:41, and this is the widow who gave only 2 pennies. It says 2 pennies, but it was 2 coins into the temple treasury. But that was all she had. So let me read that little segment here, Luke, so we could get, because he's going to talk about that in more detail as well. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, 2 copper pieces, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily, or truly, I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living, meaning everything she had. So he's using this story. Now, this isn't a parable here, because this is portrayed here as Jesus was actually watching this happen. And he was using this as what we call a teaching moment. So he brought his disciples and he pointed to her. He said, you see that woman? She gave more than those Pharisees who gave in, or the wealthy people who gave in a large amount. And now Kierkegaard says, okay, let's play with this parable. Let's play with the story a little bit. Suppose that she was swindled out of those mites. Suppose that she wrapped those mites up in a little piece of cloth, and she kept them by her. She set them down for a minute, got up, maybe got a drink of water. Somebody saw them, came along, took out the 2 mites, and just put in a stone. And she didn't know this happened, and set it down for a moment. So, would she not have been given credit for mercy if she thought that she gave the 2 pennies? So if she dropped this napkin into the treasury thinking that it was 2 mites, would she have been given, so to speak, credit? Would she have been doing this out of mercy? Of course she would have. But he goes on and says, the world tends to ridicule mercifulness, that it does not give a substantial gift. But Jesus says that this poor woman gave the most when compared with the rich people who gave a much greater amount. The world only understands money and not the lesson of Christ, he tells us. Even the church sometimes has trouble learning this lesson.
Oh boy. That's the truth.
Yeah. Of course, not all the church, but many people need to learn this lesson. They just need to learn the lesson again. Okay. Were you going to say something, Luke?
Well, whenever you're ready, I had a little blurb here to relate about the Samaritans.
Yeah, right now is a good time.
Okay. So this is from Wikipedia, and I'm just going to I've studied up on a little bit while Bob was teaching you guys. It's actually super complicated, but if I could distill it into one paragraph from the article that I'm reading, the Samaritans are adherents of Samaritanism, a religion closely related to Judaism. Samaritans believe that their worship, which is based on the Samaritan Pentateuch, is the true religion of the ancient Israelites from before the Babylonian captivity, preserved by those who remained in the land of Israel, as opposed to Judaism, which they see as a related but altered and amended religion, brought back by those returning from the Babylonian captivity. The Samaritans believe that Mount Gerizim was the original holy place of Israel from the time that Joshua conquered Canaan. The major issue between Jews and Samaritans has always been the location of the chosen place to worship God. Mount Zion in Jerusalem according to the Jewish faith, or Mount Gerizim according to the Samaritan faith. And it goes on and on. This is super fast. Apparently they're like, I don't know. I think there's something like don't quote me on this, but there might be like 800 living Samaritans like still in Israel today, and
yes,
they try to convert them to Judaism, and some of them have dual status with dual citizenships with Palestine and stuff. It's actually super fascinating. Now I like want to write a book all about them.
No, yeah, that's why it's a very complicated answer, but yeah. So he continues on and he says, eternity never has financial problems and has no use for money. Kind of a reminder to us, we can't take it with us, is the expression. Some think that the eternal is just a construction of our imagination and that money is the reality. But it's really the other way around, he tells us. Money is a construction of our imagination and eternity is the reality.
Isn't that so amazing? Isn't this so amazing? Just how the whole concept of like currency is just totally fake.
Yeah. It is. It's a value placed.
It's just
a value placed upon something. It used to be gold or silver. Now I don't even think there's a value. It's placed on anything. Is it? There is no value placed upon in the mint. Is there?
Well, this is a very complicated question about the Federal Reserve.
Yes, I know it.
Blah blah blah. But now we have emerging technology. We have cryptocurrencies that are trying to captivate everyone's imaginations. But I mean, ultimately, right? It was at one point based on precious metals, and I just think wasn't there a case where like the currency of like Holland was based on flowers, and then people. I guess the story I was told as a kid when I woke up, like when I was growing up, is people like one day were like, our money's based on flowers. This is ridiculous. Like our whole currency's based on rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if you really just step back from it, it's just totally absurd.
Well, and he's right. He's right that it's really based upon our imagination, a false sense of value. He says something that the eternal is just a structure. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that already. Kierkegaard tells us that money has become the world's god. Everything is measured by money. And it's now called earnestness. So they've changed the word from money to earnestness. And I put a little definition in here. It says sincere or intense conviction. So we're more convicted about, have more conviction when it comes to things that involve money than we are things of faith.
Is this the example he used about the daughters that like slept in and didn't go to church, but like if they had tickets to the opera, like he rushed them out the door?
Yeah, I think he did. I didn't include that. It got a little complicated to try to explain it. But do you want to go ahead?
Well, I'll give it. I think it resonated with me, so I'll try to explain it. But he was trying to say, I think what he was trying to say is like how much more seriously we take money than we do take God, because if he imagined the scenario where. If a father finds his daughters who slept in and don't make it to church in time, he's like, oh, well, next time try to make it to church or whatever. But if they had done the same thing or were running late, getting ready for very expensive opera tickets or play tickets that he had, he would have been furious and rushed them out the door with like half their makeup on or whatever. And it just really shows how messed up the priorities are. That's like, well, just make sure you go to church next week. Oh, no, we are not missing this opera. I paid $200 or 200 flowers or whatever we're measuring the currency in to go see this famous person sing.
That was an excellent retelling of the story, Luke. Better than I could have done.
You think I got it? Did I get it right?
You nailed it, my friend. Yeah, better than I could have done. Yeah. Now he talks about the wise old noble teacher. And he's speaking about Socrates here. That, believe it or not, he wouldn't accept money for his teaching. And the Apostle Paul would rather work with his own hands than have the gospel be devalued by asking for money. Can you imagine that, Luke?
I know. I actually, and I had to look that up because I didn't ever think to myself how Paul like lived day to day, but it's like super complicated because he would like my little tentative research or whatever. Like it seemed like he would like work on projects, but then like sometimes take money for certain things, but not money for other things. It seems like he would mostly do manual labor to like earn his keep as he was going around preaching or whatever. But it was weird. He didn't feel right about taking money from some sources, but he did about others. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I didn't do a deep dive into it, but I saw that it becomes an issue because I think a lot of preachers get obsessed with it. So they're like, do we think we're better than Paul somehow because Paul was working with his hands?
They do. Yes, and they just before I read those scriptures to you, that where we have the evidence, that's what he did. The answer is Paul was so worried that by taking money would send out the wrong signal to believers, that he only took it from believers who were strong in their faith and who knew that he wasn't doing it for that reason. So he took it from some because he knew it was okay. They wouldn't get the wrong idea. But others, he didn't want to take it from them. He would rather toil and labor. Okay? So first, that's two from Thessalonians, one from first, one from second. 1 Thessalonians 2, chapter 2, verse 3 through 8 says, from the NET version, says, "For we never appeared with flattering speech, as you know, nor with the pretext for greed. God is our witness, nor to seek glory from people, either from you or from others. Although we could have imposed our weight as apostles of Christ, instead we became little children among you." This is the humility of a man. He wasn't there to become famous. He wasn't there to become wealthy. He was there to teach the gospel. Okay? And he lived off the word. 2 Thessalonians, which is the one that Kierkegaard is probably really referring to, chapter 3, verse 7 to 12. "For you know yourselves how you must imitate us, because we did not behave without discipline among you, and we did not eat anyone's food without paying. Instead, in toil and drudgery, we worked night and day in order not to burden any of you. It was not because we do not have the right, but to give ourselves as an example for you to imitate. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, neither should he eat." So Paul saw it more important to be an example of humility rather than to be a product of fame. Okay, this takes a lot of courage to live accordingly, but this is the example that Paul sets for us. And that's what he says here, if I could just read that one more time. "For you know yourselves how you must imitate us." Okay, that's what he's trying to do. Imitate us. And this is what we're doing, so you imitate that which is good, that which is healthy. Okay, so be imitators.
You know what's something I notice as I go deeper into the historical contextualization of Christianity and the Bible and stuff like that, is like Paul comes under attack a lot. A lot of I've heard testimonies from people who are Jewish who say that Christianity is an invention of Paul. I've heard from people who are Christians that Paul somehow distorted the Christian message. Paul is, from all sides, Paul gets attacked a lot. And I guess I'm just kind of curious. I mean, I know it's kind of off topic, but who cares?
No, that's okay.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, why he is such a what's the thing that a pinata, in your opinion? And I guess the other question I have is, because Paul didn't meet Jesus until he had the Damascus experience, and this was after. Right. Am I getting this right? And this is after
correct.
Jesus had already. This is after Jesus had already ascended, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And I just could, but I just. Off the top of I can't recall. Could you maybe describe that powerful vision that he had about and why he took it upon himself to become such a, such an apostle, such an incredible apostle?
Yeah, he was on his way to take prisoners, actually, back to Jerusalem because they were Jews who were preaching or decided to become Christians, and he was going to bring them back. So he got permission from the Sanhedrin, from the high priest, to do just this. So he was on his way with soldiers to take them back. And this is probably something that he had done before. This is probably not something he had never done before. He was a persecutor of the faith. He admits to that. So there were persecutions that probably the guilt stayed with him for a while. But he was on his way to Damascus when there was, and you have to kind of read the different versions of the story, but the bright light shone before him, and he fell off the horse, and then he heard the voice of Christ saying, "Why do you kick against the goads? Why do you kick against the thorns," so to speak? And he realized this was Christ. And Christ told him to go into Damascus, I believe it was, and to seek out this particular individual and so forth. So it was this vision of Christ that he had, hearing and seeing this vision of Christ. And he was blinded at this point. He was made blind at this point, which I should have added. And so he had to be led into Damascus, where God had already spoken to another person to tell them, come. I think it was Cyrus. I think it was Cyrus or Silas, very close to that name, to come and put hands upon Paul and heal Paul of his blindness. This is where the story comes that the scales fell off his eyes, which preachers use this a lot. The scales fell off my eyes. So this is where that story comes from. Yeah.
So this Damascus experience that Paul had, even though there were other people around, they couldn't see it. So it was a personal revelation to him, which I think is totally legitimate. I think God could totally talk to us give us a direct revelation, even in the midst of a crowd. Is that what happened, or were there other witnesses to this?
It's complicated because there's two versions of it that are told, and it appears that it's possible that they saw the light but heard no voices. But the word for voices can be translated, they heard something but couldn't understand what was being said. So they could have heard noise but not a voice. So it gets a little bit difficult to come up with an exact answer to that question. But
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. That's a lot of information that I didn't have before. Hopefully other people enjoyed that.
Okay, good. So what would the world think if people preached without asking for money? Or if they asked for a small amount? He says that it would be considered fanaticism. In my own experience, Luke, and I'd like your input on this, in my own experience, I think that most would judge a person who preached without asking for money that he wasn't worth listening to. Do you agree with that? Do you believe that if somebody preaches and doesn't ask for something or sell a book along with it or do something, that they're saying, this guy's just a fanatic, I'm not going to listen to this guy. Now, if he charges me money for it, I'm going to give him more credibility. And I'd like you to weigh in on that.
Man. Personally, I would, I try to preach to people, and I do it at great personal risk, right? Mm-hmm. Because like I sacrifice all credibility as an academic to tell people about a man who walked on water, right?
Yeah.
I personally would find that more convincing because then you know someone's not out to rip you off financially. But as I've learned, the world does not think like I think. And that's the problem, is that people are not evangelizing to one another. So then so the people who are doing the evangelizing for free are the people with bullhorns and placards and that say the end is nigh and and that you're gonna burn in hell and all this other stuff. And I don't know. I mean, if I had a bullhorn but was preaching a message of love, maybe, I don't know. Maybe people would take that seriously. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
In our culture, though, aren't we taught that you get what you pay for? So if and there's no free lunches, aren't these the little the aphorisms that we have grown up with? So if it's free, there must be a catch to this somewhere, this thing about the kingdom of heaven. There must be a snag here if he's not selling it. If it has no financial value to it, maybe it's something underlying here. I got to watch this guy. Maybe he's trying to sell me a car or something.
Yeah. I think that's changing. I mean, I'll tell you that. I mean, now it depends on what we're going to consider cost. But I mean, I listen to these Puritan audio lectures like all the time.
Do you?
"Quote unquote" free of charge, you know, that are just uploaded on YouTube. They're like my favorite thing in the world. And so I listen to all these old sermonizers like Edward Spurgeon and Jonathan Edwards and do you know Octavius Winslow? So I listen to a lot of weird people. A.W. Pink, people like that. I get those for air quotes free. Because I have to pay for my internet connection and my cell phone. And there are a lot of people who on YouTube lead Bible studies. There's a truck driver that I listen to who does Bible studies out of the back of his 18-wheeler that I really like. His name's Brother Daryl. And so, I'm really open-minded. I'm a big believer in the information that the internet provides us for air quotes free. I mean, obviously there's nothing really for free because all the major digital companies are gathering all our information and selling it off to third parties. So there's an exchange that's going on there. But I personally listen to a lot of people who preach for free or who have been recorded. So I do, but I have a feeling I'm in a real small minority. I have a feeling there aren't too many people listening to Puritan sermons in their spare time.
You mean it doesn't have 1 million hits yet, huh? Not up to the million point?
No. Maybe about 40. And it's a shame because these Puritan sermons from back in the day. I mean, these guys. They're works of art.
Yeah, are they?
They're works of art. I mean, they weren't just getting up there and be like, "Today we're reading from Galatians, and isn't it cool?" Like, they furiously worked on those sermons as if it was going to be the last one they ever gave.
Yes.
Pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. I'm glad you appreciate them. I really am. Now he tells us that today, which is of course his day, and it's our day too, earnestness is linked to making money. So our devotion, our passion is linked with making money. To make lots of money, even by selling men, is earnestness, he says. Even to make it by slander is earnestness. Proclaiming something true, and at the same time you must make considerable money, that's earnestness. And I really like that last one, Luke. I'll read that again. Proclaiming something true, and at the same time, you must make considerable money. That's earnestness. And I'll just let that.
You know, well, you know what I'm starting to think? If you proclaim something true and you don't make any money about it, that's when they make you drink the hemlock.
Well,
or that's when they crucify you upside down. Is that how Paul died?
No, Peter. Paul died of decapitation. Yeah, because he was a Roman.
Yeah. If you're not making any money off the truth, that's it for you.
Well, man, I guess I'm going to have a hemlock chaser, huh?
I'll probably be in the loony bin in no time.
Okay. Now, it isn't that a man of God. This is my comment here. Now, it isn't that a man of God should not make a living at what he's doing, but we're talking here about excesses. Our treasure determines where our heart is. For those who have been given much, much will be expected. And perhaps those who have already been rewarded with wealth, they've already received their reward. Our faith used to be considered to be one of moderation, but now our faith has become merchandise. Is this what Jesus wanted? It's kind of like my own little question there. We're brought up.
I think you know the answer.
Yeah. We're brought up this way to worship money, he tells us. If one thinks this way about money, what must we think about those who are without money? Okay, just kind of using the contrapositive. I'm not sure if that's the right logical term. I think it might be. So if people are considered, who are wealthy, are considered to be God's chosen, then what about the poor? What should we consider about them? They're wretched people, Luke. The poor are wretched people. That's just what Kierkegaard calls them. We're brought up this way to worship money. Of course. Oh, you're going to say something? Go ahead.
You know what I was going to say? The poor are awesome. You know, I talk to a lot of people.
Yes.
And the highly intellectual people that I talk to, there is a... I'll just say this. Poor people have been so humbled by life that there isn't as much pride there. And in the absence of that pride, their minds are so open. They can receive the message of the Bible in a way that highly intellectualized people cannot. Life has brought them so far down that they can see. It allows them to see the world in ways that the smartest people can't. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. Matter of fact, I believe that our psychological situations, our environments, our experiences cause us to think differently. I just believe that. I think that people who have suffered like that see life differently. They have the capacity to hear what Jesus really taught and hear it clearly. Those who have not just cannot fully grasp what Jesus is really teaching because they just don't have the experience behind it. It's like listening to the parables but never experiencing what the parable was about and saying, well, yeah, I've heard the parable, and this is what the parable is about. This is what I've read it's about. And then try to come up with some intellectual explanation of the parable, which is not what Jesus' intention was. His intention was given to those people who had those experiences of planting things in the ground and watching them grow. You know, not somebody who reads about it. And so this is what his parables meant. You have to experience the experience in order to understand its meaning. And so people are robbed of those meanings, the deeper meanings of what Jesus' teaching is, because of our situation. And I think this is true of all of us. So when we do theology, we always have to take this and keep this in mind, that maybe our experiences are different, so we better be very cautious when we try to interpret a parable or a teaching of Jesus.
And this is testified to the fact that the most brilliant scholars of the Bible couldn't really appreciate Jesus as the Messiah when he came, and the outcasts, the poor people, were in rapt awe of all that he was trying to communicate.
Excellent point. Point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And it really gives new meaning to the expression about the meek will inherit the earth, because their minds are open to consider the invitation of Jesus Christ.
That's right. Absolutely right. The idea of the poor and the rich being merciful needs to be discussed here, he tells us. So he gives us a little bit more explanation. The poor are always looked upon as the object of mercy, and the rich are seen as the ones practicing mercy. So we have that line drawn in the sand. I'm rich, so I give the mercy. They're poor, they receive the mercy. So just don't stay on your side of the line here. The rich make the poor think that they cannot be merciful. So whether explicit or implicit, this is the idea. If you're poor, I'm sorry, you just don't get to show mercy. You're the receiver of the gift, the receiver of mercy, so keep your position. Money seems to have the power of making the poor merciless and the rich merciful. If this is true, then money has conquered completely. So this is Kierkegaard speaking here. So he's saying if it's true that there is such a line, that the rich get to be merciful and the poor don't, then money has conquered. When we have to look at our faith and ask the question, has money conquered completely in our faith? Is that how we see the world? Do we see ourselves as the rich, giving to the poor, and so we give mercy and they receive it, and that's their role in life?
I think if anyone ever comes to any kind of money, I think they should view it as on loan from God.
It's God's money, really. The way the expression, and it's true, is it's all God's money. We just get to keep part of it and give a tenth to him as a sign that the whole thing is his. And that's the attitude we have to have. If God chooses to take it from us, it's his money. He can do what he wants with it. He's letting us use it exactly how you said. We're getting to use it right now, so use it wisely, because it's his money, not yours. I
just think about how cool it would be to have. I think about how cool it would be to have money, and how many people you could give scholarships to, and churches you could build, and publications you could do. I mean, that if I was a Christian and had money and was listening to this right now, like that's what I would be thinking about.
Yep.
How are you making that work for God?
It should always be upon our minds. It should always be on our minds and influence us in our decisions. It should. How we spend it should always be there. Then he gives us another biblical story about the story of Lazarus, who had sores all over his body. He says that the dogs licked his sores, but the master did nothing. And this is a story of the master and his servant, where the servant was very poor, had sores all over his body, and the rich man ate, whatever he wanted, and had the comfortable lifestyle, and he didn't really care about Lazarus. And then they both die. Lazarus dies, and he goes to Abraham's bosom, and he's there with God, so to speak. And the rich man is not with God, and the rich man, I believe, dies and goes to hell. And he says, I didn't know all this was going to happen. If I had only known, I would have treated Lazarus a whole lot better.
I think we got the heads up.
But anyway, I don't want to tell the whole story, the whole parable, but that's the basic idea. And he says that the dogs had more mercy on Lazarus than the rich man. At least the dogs licked his sores. And Lazarus didn't do anything for the man. So this is just kind of an example there. And then he gives a story about a woman in poverty who has a daughter. And the mother denied the daughter every possible gift that she could give to her to help relieve her suffering. And the daughter only had a little bit of money and was unable to do anything for her mother. But with the smallest amount she had, she could still show mercy on her. But no matter how little she gave, to the point of nothing, it was still mercy. Even though every time a wealthy man came into town to visit her mother, he would give her mother large sums of money that made her daughter's gifts look like a paltry gift of nothing in comparison. It was like thousands of dollars compared to the $10 gift. It overshadowed her gift so much that it almost became meaningless. And he says, in eternity we will probably speak about mercy, not about money. But in eternity, mercy is going to be the value that we have. Not gold or silver or flowers, but mercy will be the backing of our currency, so to speak. When someone in eternity says that they have they gave hundreds and thousands of dollars to the poor, eternity will look at him and bewilder it, kind of scratch its head and say, what are you talking about? The question will not be how much money, but how much mercy did you show? So mercy is not dependent upon quantity. It's dependent upon how much, it's dependent upon how it's given. How does one keep their gift, a gift of mercy, and not let it become a financial reward? If one gives a gift...
Can I ask you a pragmatic question?
Yeah, try.
How do you, I think it's pretty obvious when there's like a natural disaster. I follow a lot of guys on YouTube who, whenever there's like a hurricane or flooding or something like that, they get supplies together and they go and help and pitch in and stuff like that. It's pretty obvious when there's like a natural disaster how to show mercy towards those who have lost everything or may have nothing But what do you think we can do in our day-to-day lives to show mercy to people besides like writing a check to a charity or something like that? Like for me, I love teaching, right? So I love sharing.
Yeah.
I love sharing the knowledge that, it's not been free for me to accumulate all the air quotes knowledge that I've accumulated over the years, right? Mm-hmm. And it has been a very hard fought victory to come to be born again in Jesus Christ as well. Like these are things that I have struggled with to attain. So I like to think that in some way I'm doing what God wants me to do by bringing knowledge and talking about the gospel to people whenever I can. But am I doing enough? Am I so I guess I'm just kind of curious, what does mercy look like in your eyes?
That's an excellent question, because that's one that I think I wrestle with a lot. And I think a lot of people wrestle with that. It's difficult to approach the poor because we're not always sure what that means, and it's not always safe to do. Does it really help somebody to give to somebody who's begging? A 21-year-old beggar. Does it really help anybody? We have to be very careful. Like I said, if it's God's money, we have to be careful how we spend it. So just dropping it in somebody's cup, not necessarily the best way to do it. If we feel safe enough to ask the guy to sit down and talk about the gospel, if they're willing to listen to the gospel, then maybe it's worth it. Say to somebody, look, I'll give you $5. I'll give you $10 if you sit and listen to me and preach the gospel. That's kind of a pragmatic way to do it. I know you say, oh, that's bribing him. Well, maybe, but that's using God's money too. And it gives you an opportunity to preach. So that's something really wrong with that. But another way to help, if that's a little too risky, is to find a mission that not only helps the poor, but preaches the word of God. Not just helping poor. That's not what Christianity is all about. And this is a difficult lesson. But that's not what we're supposed to do. And Paul and Kierkegaard will even talk about this. It's not that we're supposed to build hospitals for the world and provide money for the world. It's that we are to use it to preserve and to preach the gospel. So when we find a mission, if you can find a mission in town where they help the poor and preach the gospel, support it. If you listen to people online and even evangelists, even TV evangelists, Luke, who are really preaching the message of God, and I've got a few of them, support them. Send them whatever you can afford to send them. Those are gifts of mercy. That's using God's money. And of course, like you said, when it comes to generosity during a hurricane, you try to help people in desperate need as well. So that's what, I don't know if that covers everything you're thinking about there, but that's how I kind of do it. So,
well said.
Might be some ideas there to take away. Maybe there's better ideas definitely. Too. People can make suggestions to us all the time, questions, comments, and suggestions as well. So if one gives a gift, and I'm saying this here, if one gives a gift and feels the need to tell everyone about their gift, it erases the reward that God would have given them. Consider the story of the woman's mites. Remember the story that we just covered? She gave everything she had, but there's no mention that she went around telling everybody what she did. She gave silently. Okay, so it sounds like a good idea, right? But can you quote the Bible? Yes, I can. Let's listen to what Jesus says about way we ought to give. Again, this is the perfect way of giving. Matthew 6, verses 3 and 4. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So you write a check out, give it to whoever it is, or give money, and don't go back and tell all your friends how much you gave. Don't brag about it. Even if God rewards you back again, you don't need to go and tell everybody how God is giving you money. What I continue to say here is too many today are eager to blow the trumpets and sound the drums when they give to show how God has rewarded them for their gift. This is not how Jesus taught us to give. He taught us to give in silence. Why? Why should we give it? What really is the reward? Or what do we get for giving in silence, if you want to look at it that way? The reward is eternal. It's a spiritual reward that we get. And when we don't speak about it, we reveal our true character of giving. When we brag about how God has rewarded us or how much we've given, we lose the eternal reward and we gain a temporal one in place of it. So this goes along the lines of what I'm trying to teach, is that it's not so much about being right and wrong. It's where you're denying God. We're denying ourselves the ability of letting God give us the true reward, the eternal reward, and instead replacing what God's gift would have been with a temporal gift, a gift of the world. And this is true about a lot of people and a lot of theologies, is that they've replaced the eternal reward with a temporal one, and they don't even know it. The more we hear stories where someone received back from God 10 times more than they gave, the more we may tend to give just for that reason. The message it sends out. Give to God because God's going to give it back to you, and God's going to give you 10 times that amount. The damage that does. What about giving where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing? That's the message that Jesus taught us. That's what we should be telling people. We should say to people, yes, you can give to my ministry, but don't expect a reward for it. Don't expect God to give you back again. Don't expect 10 times back. Give for the sake of giving, right? When I give, Luke, truly, I don't expect anything back in return. I give it and I forget about it. If God does reward me, I don't brag about it to other people because I did nothing to deserve it. What am I going to brag about? I did only what I ought to do. I didn't do any more than I should have done. I've done what God wants me to do. So I don't deserve anything back for it. It's not mine to begin with, so I'm only giving God back what he has given me. I have no reason. Paul says this in so many words, I can't quote it verbatim, but he says, I have no reason to brag because I didn't do any more than what God has already given me. Jesus made it very clear to us about the right way to give. If people don't want to accept it, they will lose out on their eternal reward. Period. End of quote. So he goes on, mercifulness can be seen in the 2 pennies, but he says it can also be seen in the thousands. So it's not like the wealthy are left out here. So it's also cannot be seen in both. So it doesn't mean that because you're poor and everything you do is merciful. So he's really kind of really getting to the purity of the message. If you give a little, it could be merciful, but maybe it isn't. If you give a lot, it also could be merciful, but maybe it isn't. So he's saying the amount just doesn't matter. It's the way the gift is given. He says, but it's far easier for the wealthy to be distracted by the thousands than it is for the poor to be distracted by the pennies. One gives for the sake of profit and the reward and not for mercy. We completely miss Jesus' point of the parable of the sowers of the field. Now, I don't want to go in. It's going to be too lengthy if I go in. But the object of the sowers of the field is that the reward was the same for everybody, whether you worked in the field all day long or only an hour. Everybody got the same pay. It's kind of the pure form of communism, so to speak. As everybody got paid the same amount. But the people who got paid, let's say one denarius, which is 1 day's wage, the people who got paid 1 denarius were angry because the people who worked only 1 hour got paid exactly what they got. So do you see, it wasn't the amount that determined it. It was their attitude. Instead of saying, I'm so glad that I got a day's wages, and that's what I worked for, and I ought to be glad that this other person got a day's wages that he could bring back and support his family with. Instead of being glad about the equality, the egalitarianism here, they were jealous because they deserved more. And that's what this kind of gift-giving breeds. It kind of breeds this idea of, well, I gave more, so I deserve more.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think the thing that used to trouble me about that parable when I was younger is it was like, wait, is Christianity endorsing some version of communism? I'm not a communist. I love America. But, I mean, really the message of that parable is just that what I understand of that parable is that salvation remains open to all, regardless at what stage of your life you come to it. That's how I understand it. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but, some people, are babes in the faith and they, find Jesus when they're like 7, which, I wonder if that's, I wonder if that's truly possible, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it's truly possible. And then there are some of us who find Jesus on our deathbed, not because we were waiting the entire time, but maybe it takes that long, and the reward is the same, right? And we see this play out again with when Jesus is crucified and the thief next to him believes on him, and then he says, well, you'll be in paradise with me, right? It's kind of a repetition of that idea. Am I reading the story right?
Absolutely right. And it's going to be a very unpleasant experience, if I can use those terms, when some people get the kingdom of heaven and find out that they're going to get the same thing as other people get.
But I mean,
and they're going to be disappointed in heaven because they didn't get more than the other.
You think that's going to happen? I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think people are going to be jealous in heaven. Do you think that people are going to be jealous in heaven?
Well, listen, maybe next week we'll just talk about some parables that Jesus gave about people who are anticipating things and don't get what they want and are thrown into outer darkness. So we'll find out.
I just have it hard to believe that there's any discord in heaven in any way. Like, we're in freaking heaven. We made it to heaven. Like, let's just be happy.
Well, we should be. We should be. But this is a warning, though. This is a warning that Jesus gives us. Whether it actually takes place that way, a parable's a parable, and we have to take it at that. But if we just think about it, it should be a sobering thought that maybe when we get to heaven, the reward isn't going to be what we expect it to be, and our share isn't going to be what we expect it to be. So we should we shouldn't expect anything. So then whatever we get is going to be like those people who worked. You know how those people who worked 1 hour must have felt when they went to the boss and the boss gave them a whole day's pay? How would they have felt? Elated, happy, joyous. Man, this is the greatest thing. I got a whole day's pay here. What a wonderful boss I work for. And the guys who got the same pay for working all day long grumbled about the boss and said, well, that's not fair. So he was actually likening that to our attitude towards heaven. So we better be the people who are saying, God, anything you could give me, I'm grateful for. I don't deserve anything.
I just want to go to that heavenly library. That's all I want access to.
All right, we can make that arrangement. We'll try to make that arrangement, Paul. Luke, I think you're going to wind up being the librarian in the kingdom library, the eternal library.
Yeah.
All right. So in eternity, the only thing that matters is mercy, he tells us. The fact that God gave it back to us tenfold is not mercy and will mean nothing in eternity. Okay, let's see. It's not an act of faith by which we give. No, I'll skip that here. Let me see. The widow gave without expecting a reward. Whatever God gave back to her is a revelation of God's grace. An expectation removes grace. Her gift enabled her to become part of God's grace. Our expectation, Luke, is so critical in the element of grace because grace is always defined as undeserved reward, undeserved mercy. The moment we believe that God is obligated to give us something, we erase the whole idea of a gift of grace. That's why it's so important to not take that idea towards wealth and towards grace. It's because it robs us of our eternal reward. It's not just a theology here. Okay, it's not, again, just being right or being wrong. It's a theology where we're replacing grace with man's temporal reward, eternal grace with temporality. This woman, for all we know, the woman who gave 2 mites, for all we know, she died in poverty because she gave her last pennies. For all we know, she might have died in poverty. There's nothing that Jesus tells us that shows she became rich because of this gift. Okay? Nothing that says this woman became wealthy. He never told us a parable like that. But that would have been a great time to add on to that. Oh, and by the way, this woman became really wealthy because she gave like this. But he didn't. Silence is the key here, Luke. Okay, let's see. Luke here, chapter 6, verse 34 and 36 I have written down here to end on it. This is my ending quote. It's nice to end on a biblical quote, right? How could we do better than that? It says here, and if you lend them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be ye therefore merciful as your heavenly Father is merciful. That's what mercy is. It's with the expectation of receiving. Lending without the expectation of making interest, making money back. That's the whole key. What he's saying here. What Kierkegaard is saying here. To be merciful, you cannot have expectations. And I'm ending on that hopefully high note.
Very high. Thank you for teaching us today, Bob. It's a great lesson. Had a lot of fun. I had a couple jokes that didn't work, but that's okay.
Your value is unmeasurable, and it does not go unrewarded, my friend. Gifts of mercy.
The reward.
Luke, your words are gifts of mercy.
Yeah, the feeling is mutual. Hey, so I'm gonna, Bob, you'll send me the audio file. I'll have the nice audio up later tonight. You can find this live stream on my YouTube channel. Download the Noetic app. We'll have it all up there, SoundCloud. And man, I'm just gonna keep chipping away, chip away. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, only a few chips left now. We're getting down to the end.
Of this book, yeah. We have to decide, yeah. Maybe, yeah, if you guys want to let us know, Bob and I were talking off air before we start about what book of Kierkegaard's we're going to cover next. If anyone, as far as I'm concerned, I hope that we cover them all. So it doesn't really matter to me what order they happen in. If anyone has a preference and they want to let us know, we'll take it into consideration. philosophyluke@gmail.com. Yeah, I'm thinking we should do something maybe a little bit shorter, but, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, we're going to cover everything. But yeah, all right, we should bring this to a close. And Bob, I will talk to you soon. Okay, buddy?
Okay, take care. God bless.
All right, bye-bye.